Hi, good evening, everyone. Well, good evening, Sumiland. Good evening for organizing the chat room. Uh, I've been talking about China's economy and politics for quite a while. Let's change the subject for tonight. Let's talk about the world's two famous best buddies and see what they're up to. So, all right. Well, that's the announcement that I'm actually live. All right. So when what I want to do is present a series of events that have developed in the past 5 months since Xi Jinping visited Russia in March. Here we do have a picture. Do I have a picture? I do have a picture. And this is the famous parting handshake, right? When Xi Jinping was caught on camera making that famous last comment. But anyways, so since then, a whole series of events have developed, and some people say the Sino-Russian relations seem to have gone stronger. So, for example, China's defense minister Li Shangfu is in Russia now for a second visiting for a month. I do have a picture here. Here's him giving a speech. Now, he is sanctioned by the US and has repeatedly refused to meet with his counterpart, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. And in July, China and Russia conducted a joint military exercises near Japan. And Minister Li met with the commander of the Russian Navy in Beijing. I have a picture. It's a little blurry, but that's the picture. And on August the 7th, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, sorry, let me turn this off. He called his counterpart, the Russian foreign minister, and the two spoke on the phone. And Wang described China-Russia relations as trustworthy, reliable, good friends, and good partners. And most importantly, Putin is scheduled to visit China in October, and that was announced, I think, last month. So these developments make us wonder if China-Russia relation, if the China-Russia relationship is as strong as it seems. With the risk of war in the Taiwan Strait escalating, should we be concerned with strengthening military cooperation between China and Russia? Now, like I said, in the 5 months since Xi's visit to Moscow, a series of 12 events have illustrated that the relationship of convenience isn't as strong as the Russians and the Chinese want us to believe. And so tonight I'm going to talk about 8 decisions that Putin made that annoyed Xi Jinping. And then we'll talk about 4 things that Beijing did that certainly upset Moscow. In the end, I'll leave you to assess the status of Sino-Russian relations. But I think these events speak for themselves. So first, let's talk about, I could get rid of these slides because I don't have any slides prepared for you for the 12 events. Those pictures, oh, actually I do have 2 slides. Okay, I'll come back. They're just one or 2 pictures. So let's first talk about the 8 decisions that Putin made that were annoying to Xi Jinping. Let's start with Xi's visit to Russia in March. During Xi's visit to Moscow, he issued a joint statement with Putin declaring that all countries with nuclear weapons should refrain from deploying nuclear weapons outside their territories. Both reaffirmed their commitment to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons treaty. However, 3 days after Xi left Moscow on March 25th, Putin said in a media interview that Russia would deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. That's a slap in the face to Xi Jinping. Secondly, from May 15th to 26th, she sent a special envoy, Li Hui, to visit Ukraine, Poland, France, Germany, the EU, and Russia to promote Beijing's version of its version of the Russia-Ukraine peace talks. Western countries thought that China was trying to play the role of a spokesperson or a mediator on Russia's behalf. But Russia's actions speak louder. Russia's actions said otherwise. On the night of Li Hui's visit to Kiev, Russia fired 30 missiles at Kiev. And on the night of Li's visit to Moscow, Russia fired, what am I saying? Filed, tax return, fired 17 missiles and launched 31 drone strikes at Kiev, and also the city of Dnipro and eastern Ukraine. Throughout Li Hui's visit, Russia's military actions against Ukraine continued without any sign of willingness for a truce or peace talks, and Putin refused to meet with Li Hui. This is the second slap in the face. Third, then on June 24th, the head of the Wagner Group staged a short-lived mutiny. We all remember that from June. And at the time of the chaos, Putin called his friends, some for help and some for communications. He called the president of Belarus, who was a mediator between him and Prigozhin. Putin also talked with the Kazakhstani president, the Uzbekistani president, Turkey's president, Qatar's emir, and the Iranian president. But he did not talk to his friend in Beijing, who claimed to be his best friend. Are we surprised? Well, that's event number 3. Number 4, on July 17th, Russia announced that it was suspending its participation in the Black Sea grain export agreement, which allowed Ukraine to complete the export of 33 million tons of grain through the Black Sea. Of those 33 million tons of Ukraine grain, a quarter, or 8 million tons, were exported to China. Now, China's domestic harvest this year is poor, and it will need the grain from Ukraine. Russia's move is seen as a stab in the back to Beijing, or at least it does not care how Beijing react or say. Fifth, number 5, Russia dumping yuan. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China-Russia trade heated up. Russia got a lot of renminbi, but other than buying things from China, the renminbi is useless for Putin. Russia's central bank warned about the risk of holding renminbi, as it's not fully tradable. And Russia's finance ministry alleged that oil and gas revenues fell short of expectations by about 30.3 billion rubles in June, and a projected shortfall of 4.5 billion in July. And Russia needed to sell nearly 35 billion ruble equivalent renminbi to make up for the revenue shortfall, which was expected to take place between July 7th and August 4th. The above Russian announcement was reported by Xinhua News. That's how we know, or how I know. And it was said that Russia was dumping at least 8.45 billion yuan in about 2 months. Now, money is money. Russia's central bank is selling renminbi to buy dollars and euros. Russia's holding of renminbi reserves has fallen by 1/3, and it's the largest renminbi sell-off in Russia, or by Russia, in recent years. And it is one of the reasons for the recent depreciation of the Chinese yuan. That would not make Xi Jinping very happy. 6, Russia announced an increase in the production of 2 precious metals. One is germanium and the other is gallium. On July 3rd, in an effort to counter the U.S. sanctions on semiconductor exports to China, Beijing announced that it would impose export controls on gallium, and germanium to key materials used in the manufacturing of semiconductors. 2 days later, on July 5th, Russia's Technological State Group told Reuters that Russia was prepared to increase its production of germanium to meet domestic demand. And Russia's leading gallium producer, a company called Rusal, RUSAL, also said that it would increase gallium production. The CCP certainly got upset. You could tell by one of the articles that a Chinese wrote, and the title is, What do the two Russian companies want? Troubles? The title was full of emotion. I don't even think my translation reflected the emotionally charged statement in that title. The article basically said that global annual germanium production is about 130 tons. China's export share accounted for 60%, which was about 70 tons. And it alleged that Russia could replace China as a major germanium exporter because it has that capacity if it wants to exert its effort. The article called Russia's claim that its production is for domestic use a complete lie because Russia's optical and semiconductor industries are seriously underdeveloped, and its production of germanium and gallium is strictly for export and to replace China. All right, that's fun, isn't it? Number 7, Russia arrested scientists suspected of leaking secrets to China. On May 24th, Reuters reported that 3 scientists from the Institute of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics of the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences were arrested on suspicion of leaking secrets to China about hypersonic missiles. A series of Russian scientists have been arrested in recent years for allegedly leaking sensitive information to the Chinese. For example, Russian laser expert, his name is Dmitry Koker, I hope I pronounced his name right, was arrested in Siberia last year. Like the West, Russia has always been wary of the CCP's theft of technologies, and is concerned about losing some of its technological advantages over the CCP. So that's not fun for the Russians. Last but not least, South China Sea. Recently, we know that China has revived its confrontation with the Philippines in the South China Sea. Russia seemed to have picked a side. The CCP is certainly mad about 2 events. In June, I think it was June 22nd, some say June 25th. I'm not quite sure exactly the date, but it's in the 20th, in the latter half of June. The Institute of Social Sciences Information, is that the right translation? The Institute of Social Science Information of the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Russian Peace Road International Foundation. These may not be the correct translation of these 2 organizations because I used translation software. I hope they picked up the names correctly. But basically, these 2 organizations, one is affiliated with the Russian Academy of Sciences, and the other is the Russian Peace Road International Foundation, jointly hosted a conference in Moscow titled Commitment to the Peaceful Development of the South China Sea Based on International Law. Now, the conference invited Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, which all have disputes with the CCP in the South China Sea. Interestingly, the Russians did not invite China, the largest country in the South China Sea, but did invite India, which is not in the South China Sea, right? Which is not directly part of the South China Sea. Some Chinese are bitter about not being invited by the Russian big brother, and they're upset about another development in the South China Sea. On June 28th, the Russian satellite news agency reported that the first batch of BrahMos supersonic missiles, jointly developed by a Russian-Indian joint venture, will arrive in the Philippines at the end of December. Now, I do want to share you the pictures. Here it is. This is the company. It's a joint venture that's 51% owned by India and 49% by Russia. The company is called BrahMos. I hope I pronounced it right. But the missile bears that name. But anyways, the Indians and the Russians called the product the Magic Missile. And in August 2016, India deployed the Magic missiles for the first time near the India-China border in the northeast. So the Chinese are not happy with Russian-made missiles being sent to the Philippines to confront China. So the Russian actions in the South China Sea absolutely did not make the CCP or Xi Jinping happy. But I must say, they are the result of what he had done to Putin previously. So now, let me get rid of the pictures. Let me come back. Let me now talk about the 4 decisions that Xi Jinping made that annoyed Putin and that I think have soured China-Russia relations. First, I think the Russian conference on the peace initiative in the South China Sea was a direct protest the Russian launched against Xi Jinping's the China Central Asian Summit. If you remember, from May 18th to this 19th, Xi Jinping hosted the China Central Asia Summit in Xi'an with the heads of state of 5 Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. I'm sorry, I'm challenged with these names, but I'm hoping to get them right. Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. I saved myself from not having to pronounce the names of the 5 heads of state because they're long, and so but you know who they are, right? So Central Asia has always been the Russian sphere of influence, and by organizing the summit, Xi Jinping or the CCP is seen as competing with Russia for influence in Russia's backyard. And on the eve of the summit, Russia issued a stern warning. A Russian spokesman stated that the 5 Central Asian states should be aware of the importance of Russia in the region, and that the weakening of their relations with Russia would have serious consequences, which would be no less severe than those resulting from the sanctions imposed by the West. That sounds serious. At the summit, Beijing announced that it would provide financing support and non-reimbursable assistance totaling 26 billion yuan to the 5 countries. And what annoys Putin the most is that Beijing proposed to build the 4th China Central Asia gas pipeline, known as the D line, at the summit. This must have infuriated Putin because Russia has repeatedly asked Beijing to start the PS2 gas pipeline project. So that brings us to the second matter that annoyed Putin. Let's talk about the power. It's called the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, or PS2. If it's built, it would connect China to a gas field on the Yamal. I'm just terrible at pronouncing these names. It's a Russian peninsula to the north, Yamal. And the field, the gas field, had traditionally served the European market until the EU sanctions imposed against Russia. And Putin has hoped to set up the construction of the PS2 pipeline um, to compensate for the loss of gas revenue in the European market, right, by supplying supplying it to China. While Russia has repeatedly expressed its wish to start the construction of the PS2 line, the CCP has remained quiet. During Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, it was highly anticipated, but there was no agreement reached for the PS2. And during the Russian Prime Minister, his May visit to China, Beijing didn't make a commitment to the PS2 pipeline either. So it was certainly a big disappointment to Putin. Now, those are the first two events that the decisions that the CCP made that I think would have certainly annoyed Putin. The following two events happened almost simultaneously in August, just very recently. On August 5th to 6th, representatives of 42 countries met in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, to discuss the 10-point peace plan proposed by Ukraine, which requires Russia's withdrawal from all Ukrainian territories. Russia was excluded from the conference. Russian Foreign Ministry called the meeting a hoax. To many people's surprise and delight, Beijing sent its special representative to the conference. This is because previously Beijing didn't send a representative to a similar conference in Copenhagen in June. Some believe that Beijing participated in the Jeddah summit because it wants to maintain good relations with the host country, Saudi Arabia. China's primary source of gas and oil is from the Middle East, so saving the face of Vladimir Putin is not as important as Beijing's oil and gas source. So that's number three. And fourth, on August 4th, the Chinese embassy in Russia posted on WeChat that on July 29th, 5 Chinese nationals who intended to enter Russia by car from Kazakhstan were denied entry. Their tourist visas were voided, and they were questioned by Russian authorities for 4 hours. According to the Post, the Chinese embassy requested to meet with the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Russian Federal Border Services, and the Russian Federal Security Services to protest the barbaric and excessive law enforcement on its citizens. And the Chinese claim that the incident had seriously jeopardized the lawful rights and interests of its people and was inconsistent with the friendly relations between the two countries. Bloomberg said that the language used by the Chinese embassy in its post is more in line with the language typically used when China protests against the West. Beijing really protests against Russia's quote-unquote brutal law enforcement. So this incident made it to the Weibo's top search list. And especially when several Chinese media outlets made headline reports about the mistreatment by the Russians. So Chinese netizens commented that it was the first time that they've seen a protest made by their government against the Russians in many years. So they asked, what signal is the government trying to send? Well, we don't know why the denial of 5 Chinese turned into a major issue like that. Maybe it's not Xi Jinping's idea. But anyways, after the Jeddah conference and then the border dispute, Beijing, I think, might have feared that the friction with Russia would get out of control. So China's Wang Yi thus called his Russian counterpart on August the 7th and described Sino-Russian relations as, like I said in the beginning, trustworthy, reliable, we're good friends, and we're good partners. And Shangfu was probably dispatched to repair damages because the CCP doesn't want the West to perceive China-Russia relations going downhill. It wants to maintain the image that the alliance is going strong so they can counter um, or deter the Western alliance in the Pacific. Okay, so I just spelled out the 12 events in 5 months that I think have defined China-Russia relations. To summarize, I think Putin and Xi need each other's support because they're both stuck in an isolated, lonely geopolitical landscape. Their relationship is far from best buddies. And I think the best way to describe their relationship is this Chinese expression. Those of you who speak Chinese can appreciate that. It's called 同床异梦. It's a very common expression that Chinese use to describe relationship, any kinds of relationship. The direct translation is the literal translation is sleep in the same bed but dream different dreams. So in terms of politics or geopolitics, it means that people appear to be in the same camp but may have or have different agendas. So with that, I end my talk on Sino-Russian relations. And let me see if people have questions for me. All right. Let me see. Jeff Ramos. To the thumbnail, more like frenemies. No? If there's a word, yeah, frenemies. All right. Let me see. Not many questions. Are people not? Oh, Steve Kim. Recently, some friends of mine returned from Shanghai visiting family. They told me their relatives recommended they not return to China. Do your contacts reflect this thinking? Great work. Yes, I would advise people not to return to China. I think the government is purging or is it's trying to come up with a database that documents the asset, your wealth. It has pretty much cut the chives for the lower strata of the people, for the poorer people. Now it's focusing on the wealthy ones. So it wants to come up with this master database that documents everyone, your name, who you are, where you work, how many bank accounts you have, and how much money you have. And it's trying to do that. It has recently arrested the head of this immigration company, China's largest immigration consulting company that specializes in U.S. immigration. It has customers. I think the number of customers it has is in the hundreds of thousands. That's what I heard. That's a lot of wealthy people. So the government demanded the owner of the company to provide to release the data, the customer database, and I think they might have refused. So they detained her and also her associates, one of her associates. So yeah, so the government is trying to have a very clean list of everyone that has money, and then they're coming after your money. So it was advised that people, yeah, there are a lot of people that go back and forth between China and the United States, or China and other parts of the world, Australia, Canada, because their business is based in both places, or they have, yes, big business or family in China. So they go back and forth. So it was advised that they don't return to China in the near future. So that was that's true. All right. Will the CCP go after? I'm just picking a question randomly from the Acadian guy. Will the CCP go after Chinese living in overseas? Yes, they will. They recently issued an announcement telling people to turn themselves in if they have like financial disputes with the government, and if yeah, I think that they're sending that message to some Chinese nationals living outside China. And once I saw a number, they were like the number of retired CCP officials living outside China uh, is in the tens of thousands, maybe even more. So Chinese people find it shocking that so many retired CCP officials are living a good life outside China, and they're wondering why, if the system treat them so well, or if they, I mean, it seems that they have the best of both worlds. So these people, may be forced to go back to China. Um, okay, from Venkat, thank you for the donation. From Ed C, do you think the next U.S. president will get credit for the fall of CCP and Putin, like Reagan and Berlin Wall? Um, it depends on who we have, right? Um, so we'll get the credit. Yeah, sure. He more than likely he will. All right. How are Chinese citizens able to leave the country? Not very easy. How are they now? No, they're not able to, because at airport, even you get a even you have your, if you don't have a passport, it's very difficult to get a passport now. And even if you have a passport, it's very difficult to get a visa now. And if you have have a passport and a visa, your passport may be cut up by the border agent at Chinese airport, because if they deem you are someone who should not leave China, they could cut up your passport and you still can't leave. So it's very difficult. All right. All right. A vegan, a vegan T-Rex, like, would the US ever persuade Russia to side with them against China? They should, you know. I think they should. I don't think Russia was interested in a position that's against the US and for China. I think Putin is very smart to know that. But somehow things transpire into the way we have it now, right? Um, I think the US should, because Russia is so much smaller than the CCP, and it's not as aggressive. I mean, it's bad in launching a war against Ukraine, but its ambition is certainly not to take over the world like the CCP does. So I think the U.S. should persuade Russia to side with them against the CCP. All right, from Brew, what's your view on GOP candidate? It's a long name. He seems to be very vocal against CCP aggressions. I have been so busy following CCP politics, and I have not been following domestic US politics. So I'm kind of not aware of who's running, who's not. Um, all I know is Joe Biden has announced his re-election, um, and Donald Trump has, the two of them are probably going to have a rematch. Other than that, I haven't really followed other candidates, so can't really say a whole lot about that candidate. Uh, Mitsu, do you see that the story on how much the subway construction is what's causing sinkholes in the road in China? I really worry the quality of so many construction projects in China, particularly the ones in recent years. I mean, if you look at, I mean, the system, the construction material, right? First of all, you have, if anything goes wrong in material, in the design of the project, and in the construction of the project, things can go wrong, right? So it could be material, it could be the design, it could be the construction, and it could be all of them. So people are telling me that the buildings that China uh, is constructing or has constructed in recent years are not as good as the ones that we've seen earlier. Even though the earlier years, you have tofu drag projects. So yeah, I think a lot of the sinkholes that we've seen could be and could be just the substandard construction projects. Um, Let me see. Max Schreller, if millions of Chinese seniors die from COVID, did it help CCP to reduce spending on pension? Um, Sorry, did it help CCP spend on, if millions die at 60, 70 years, they wouldn't need pensions. Was COVID blessing for CCP? Um, I think from that perspective, it's you could say that it's to some extent helped the CCP, right? But on the other hand, the social instability factor, if people, because when you lose, because Chinese culture is one that people do respect the elderly parents. So the um so so when you lose an elderly at home is a loss to a family, to his children or to his child. So if you have so many people died, uh, it is it has a social impact and an emotional impact on Chinese society. Um, and yeah, and it could also cause fear among the other people, among the younger generations. And I don't think it's only the casualties were only among the elderlies. I mean, we've heard young people, people younger than 60 and 70 years old also died. So uh, it's the panic, it's the emotional burden that's seriously detrimental. Brian Smith, Camp David summit with the US, Japan, South Korea is happening very soon. Do you have thoughts about how China will react? I think it's didn't we see here we have you're exactly right. These three countries get together to talk about emergency communication, right? They talked about setting up an emergency hotline. Um, Now, then you have, on the other hand, you see China's defense minister going to Russia and talk about how how China wants to work with Russia and Belarus. So you also have a three-country lineup. So is that China's reaction uh, or countermeasure against the Camp David summit? It might be, it might be perceived that way. Do you think that she was aware that Russia was going to invade Ukraine when they did? And was it a surprise to him? Oh, I think absolutely. I think he was aware. I think he might even encouraged Putin. I really believe that. I think that Putin's visit to Beijing before the war to attend the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, I think he was greatly encouraged. He was fooled and was encouraged, because from Xi's perspective, a war in Ukraine will drag the US and EU and its allies into this geopolitical crisis, and it will divert attention, right? So it gives the CCP a better chance um, to invade Taiwan, and also it will weaken Russia. It will make Russia depend on China. So a war in Ukraine is in the best interest of the CCP. So I think he definitely encouraged his best friend, like he did in this during his visit, right? The parting words of what he said. He said, "The change of a century. Let's make the best out of this opportunity. That's once in 100 years, something like that." So Nick Fury, Xi and China is a small kidney stone in Putin's side that he tolerated. Oh, that's a very good way to put it. All right, Luke. My parents-in-law are first-generation immigrants to the UK. While they have comfortable lives outside China, they get furious when someone criticizes the CCP. How can you reach people like that? Um, I think it's an emotional bond. I used to be like that when I was younger, much younger. You feel like China is this gives you this remote memory about your childhood, about it's the place that you were born in and that you grew up. So you don't want to lose that. And it's I think it's just fear of facing reality. And also, a lot of Chinese fear criticism of any kind. And I think that's a CCP culture. And we do need constructive criticism in order for us to improve. I mean, if a person never hears any criticism, you think that person is going to be successful? No, right? Um, so, how do we reach people like that? I think be understanding, be rational, lay out the facts, and not be overly critical. Just lay out the facts. This is what they do. Maybe make them aware that they're avoiding something. They refuse to see. They refuse to. They, in their heart, they know what we're saying is right. They just refuse to acknowledge that, because if they do, they feel like they they don't know what to do with China. They have not worked out in their mind how to deal with um, a government that has done terrible things to its people. So maybe you could tell them, China, you love Chinese people, but you don't love the government. You don't love a political party. Just like we're not in favor of one political party or neither. So maybe make that um, disconnect for them. You know, say, we understand that you love China and love Chinese people, and we do too. But what's wrong with criticizing a political government, a political party, and a government that's not doing a good job? Um, I think we need to make them understand a political party does not equate to a government or never the country, right? All right, let's see. Um, um, Jill Welsh, you just announced Joe Biden's re-election and he doesn't even know it. Did I say his intent to to be re-elected, to be re-elected, his re-election campaign. I'm not saying that he's going to be re-elected. I'm saying his re-election campaign or his intention to be re-elected. All right. All right. Jairo Herrera. I read online text. If Mao anything was alive, Mao's son, he would have been the next leader in China by establishing a family dynasty like North Korea. Is there any truth to this? Um, that's a very good question. It's not going to happen in China because it has already been destroyed. I mean, by Deng Xiaoping, right? So if Deng Xiaoping has tremendous support in the West, and anyone who supported or support Deng Xiaoping would not support a descendant from Mao to be in power, because it was Deng Xiaoping who removed Mao's chosen successor and removed Mao's wife. So the world has not made up their mind about who they want to rule China. At least the West doesn't know. They thought Deng Xiaoping was a good choice, but even after he opened fire on the students in Tiananmen Square, and I think by now, I think the CCP is running out of time. People don't care who's gonna run. I think the time the CCP has is over. Um, but in North Korea, I think it's the transition of power is less problematic because it has adopted an imperial system. It just goes down. It goes down this line, this lineage, through blood, the bloodline of the Kim's family. It's simpler. At least people don't argue that. But in China, it's this totalitarian system that follows no rule. So as far as who's going to be the next leader is just up for grab, and they're just fighting for that, which will bring down the CCP. All right. From Mitsu, can you do a story on Chinese employment regarding the curse of 35? I have already done a program on Chinese unemployment rate. It's tremendously high. The curse of 35. Yeah, I think if you are if you're over 40, like you're finished. Yeah, in some industries, if you're over 35, you're finished. And yet, young people under 24 can't find a job. So your career is what, between the window of 24 and 35? And that's ridiculous. All right, from Boyka, China. She paid Putin billions to invade. Their energy deal included the text, mutual recognition of the expanded territory of the other without limits. Yes, that's very well said. All right. Let me see. Any more questions for me? From Moonwalker, Lei, who do you think can eat more dumplings in a contest? Kim Jong-un or Xi Jinping? I think Xi Jinping can. Kim Jong-un doesn't look very healthy to me. I mean, there has been like rumors of him being in bad health, and I think he's also smaller, right? Xi Jinping is didn't we hear that he's a heavy drinker, like he can drink? I think Xi Jinping would win a dumpling contest. All right, that's a good question. I love that. All right, from David Lopan, would you be willing to do an episode covering the CCP support for various terrorist groups around the world? Well, that would need some good investigation on my part for me to do that. But that would be interesting. From Mitsu, do you think a rogue AI could end up freeing the Great Firewall, as some of the first AI they've tried kept resisting them? But who controls the AI is the question, right? Didn't I hear that the AI is getting a little dumber over the past couple of months? GPT is not as smart as when it first came out. Did I hear that? Marcus Wilson. It's not easy to bring down CCP from within. Do you think in order for CCP to collapse, it has to be from within? I think it would take a concerted effort from within and outside, but I think the Chinese people will certainly play um, the major role. I think it will come from within. All right. Yeah, I was just somebody just told me the story about how the Berlin Wall fell, Everything looked so accidental, right? Um, Everything looked accidental. Like one thing leads to another. I think there was the municipal leader of Berlin had a press conference and announced that people, the people asked them if they're going to open the gate, like the access to West Germany. Eh, Um, okay, I'm not going to tell that story, but basically, what I got from that entire episode is because the system is already paralyzed. In a communist system, when officials are afraid to have any accountability of any decision, then they're going to do random things and say random things that will ignite the public, and then the public will react. And China has already reached that point. Like nobody wants to make any decision, and nobody wants to be account for anything. So one small event can lead to an entire meltdown, and that's exactly what happened during um, the downfall of the Berlin Wall. So it could happen very quickly in China. All right, Nick Furry, why do you think some Chinese diasporas still think of China as their motherland despite immigrating to the West or other nations? Loyalty would be questioned in such situation. It's because the Chinese have the CCP has extensive reach, have extensive control over them in the West. They rely. This is the issue that Western governments, particularly the United States, have not paid attention to. I've always made this point. The U.S. politicians, when it comes to Sino-U.S. relations, it always focuses on the Chinese government, the CCP, the government officials. It has removed the Chinese people in its calculation of Sino-U.S. relations, when the CCP has always targeted the American public in its maneuver of a relation with the U.S. It has developed so many programs targeting to manipulate, massage the American public opinions to influence their government. And the US government just don't do anything. And I'm not talking about the US government targeting the Chinese in mainland China. I mean, they should at least do something to protect the Chinese Americans living in the United States. And they're not doing enough. I mean, I think now they start to realize that. But for all these years, I've witnessed how much influence the CCP has in Chinese communities in Los Angeles, in California, in New York, in Washington, D.C., you name it, throughout North America, in Australia, in UK. They have, and so for a Chinese immigrant, they live in New York, but they read newspaper influenced by the CCP. They use WeChat, they use TikTok. I mean, they use all these social apps that are manipulated by the CCP. I mean, how are we going to help them to assimilate into American society? They don't know. They're still subject to brainwashing from the CCP day in, day out. So the American government has neglected the role the Chinese Americans play in Sino-US relations. I have been saying this for like over 10 years. Nobody cared and nobody listened. And so now all of a sudden we realize, and now the Chinese Americans bear the pressure of this relation, the bilateral relations, going sour. And all of a sudden Chinese Americans realize, well, we're not very welcomed here. I think the U.S. government should develop programs that reach out to Chinese Americans. They must support Chinese American associations, media outlets that reflect American interest, that support America. And there are a lot of organizations like that out there, but they're just not getting the support. And I think that's very, very sad. For example, I bring up, for example, media outlets, uh, like Epoch Times, right? Some people don't like Epoch Times because they say they support Donald Trump. But I would say Epoch Times started as a Chinese language media that's most outspoken against the CCP in Chinese communities. So if you talk to anyone in the Chinese community, they know that if you want to read a media that that's that speaks that tells you what's really happening in China and reflects American um, that reflects American values that are not for CCP. I'm talking about media outlets in the Chinese community. That's Epoch Times, and they have a track record. They've been around for I don't know how many years, 20 years, uh, maybe 20 years. No one has done that as much as they have done, but now they're being attacked for being conservative or whatever. I mean, they're being attacked for all kinds of names, like the NBC and New York Times have done hit pieces on Epoch Times, and it's very sad for me because you know they are what they're doing is they're protecting American interest. They are helping Chinese Americans to understand what America is, and they're trying to free Chinese Americans, particularly the new immigrants coming from mainland China, to not be afraid to speak up. And they're doing the hand holding to these new immigrants, and yet they're being attacked by Americans, by New York Times, by NBC. I'm like, what are they doing? Because when you do that, you're really doing everything that the CCP wanted to do, but are not able to do. So I think American mainstream media and American politicians should overcome their political division within this country, whether it's the left or the right, whether you are pro-Trump or pro-Joe Biden. But they really need to take a look at the big pictures. I know there are a lot of people who support Joe Biden who don't like the CCP, but who also, for example, don't like the Epoch Times, without understanding Epoch Times is really doing a great service for this country. Um, and no one can dispute their track record in exposing the CCP. They're the first in this entire industry. So I just hope that Americans can really see that. Uh, and there are, like, now we have the Chinese editions of the New York Times, the Chinese editions of Wall Street Journal. You have the Chinese editions of the Guardian. I mean, all the mainstream medias have Chinese editions. But you know what? When I read them, they're just the translated versions of their English editions. They're not in language, in culture. They feel very Western, right? And they hire journalists that work stationed in China. I mean, the journalists they hire are not going to be as outspoken as the people who work for Epoch Times. Basically, the people who work for Epoch Times cannot go back to China. They've already cut that ties, so they are free to say anything, right? But the Chinese journalists who work for New York Times and Wall Street Journal, my question is, can they go back to China, right? So if they do, then there are a lot of things that they can't really say. Um, so I read both. I read but I think there's a big difference when it comes to China coverage between the Epoch Times and then the Chinese editions of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and all of them. There's a big difference. So all I'm saying is the mainstream society in the US need to understand the important role that Chinese American communities play in the battle with the CCP. And you've got to hold their hands. You've got to do the right thing. Don't be so caught up in your own politics that you forgot the most important player that could be on your side and you're neglecting them. And I'm just one woman, who's speaking up and who's not afraid. But there's so many Chinese Americans out there who are afraid to say anything, and due to the kind of ignorance that we've seen in the mainstream society. So I hope people do recognize that. But whoever asked the question, I thank you for bringing up that question. Um, Charles Womack, do you think the struggle session are coming up next? What's 批判斗争? Oh, in the second cultural revolution, it feels like it. A lot of people are saying that because the CCP is running into economic problems, going through it. It's going through the same political campaign in the 1950s and 60s to embezzle private wealth so that the government does not go bankrupt. So it's going to do that in the name of anti-corruption. It's going to basically, it's doing that in the healthcare industry right now. So it looks like it's happening. All right, I have talked a lot. So that's all for today. And thank you for joining. And I will see you later this weekend. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Good night.